facetoface.com is both where we list what's coming up in terms of the events for the group, but also it's our archive of where things go when they're recorded, and it's our forum where people can chat. So please join us there with 10,000 other learning professionals. If you have an issue, you can share it. If you've got something to say, you can share that with somebody who wants a problem solved. Now, the sound on this event is coming purely through the headset and the computer. We're not using the phone, so there's no dial-in for this call. So please bear with us on that. We had some real problems this morning with the audio. We're just using voice over IP. The chat, please continue to share in the chat, as I have said, every 2 weeks for the last 5, well, I don't know, it must be 7, 8, maybe even 10 years. In fact, it is 10 years. No one person in the room is brighter than all of us. If we can share collegiately, we can all learn from each other. Please continue to do so. And of course, afterwards, please continue to share what you've learned from Nuri and from Saffron on the internet. Our preferred medium is Twitter with LSG Webinar. Let people know what they are, what you're thinking. Right, let's shift over. That's enough from me. Let's move ourselves over to Nuri Sazen, who's going to be taking us through this important question about digital disruption, digital change. How do we deal with it? Is it enough just to do more of what we've done up till now? I'm not the expert, but fortunately Nuri's here to help us. Nuri, over to you.
Thanks, Don. So just to introduce myself, thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Nuri Sazen, and currently I have the pleasure of leading Saffron. But prior to that, my background was really in consulting and change management. So I was a partner at KPMG, leading their people services business in London and Eastern counties. But I've also worked on the other side in terms of working in-house, and I've held global positions at BP and in an EMEA regional role for Lend-Lease. So worked on both sides of the fence essentially. But since joining Saffron, we're very much focused on using that understanding of general business and behavioural science to provide experiential learning solutions for our clients' learners, where we measure that increase in performance of the programs that we've created on the business and most importantly in terms of the learners themselves. So the question really that I wanted to start with is, how is digital disruption affecting your business? And I really wanted to ask that question. So please use the chat, and I don't mean how is it affecting you personally or your L&D department, but the actual business or industry sector that you work in. So share your thoughts on that.
I'm looking forward to. Oh my goodness, we've got Hannah saying that she cannot hear. Yatra saying she can't hear anything. I've got 2 machines plugged in here, and I can hear on both. And I think other people are typing. I think we're okay. I'm going to contact Yatra individually and try to help Yatra. Okay, please, guys, let us know your answer to this one. And contact Yatra by herself.
Charles is saying, how's it not affecting any business? True. Yeah, revenue streams due to new players. Lots of appetite, but not sure what they need. Changing how products are offered. Yeah, some really good answers in there about consumer behavior in particular.
As well. Yeah, you know, really specific views of Jared saying about how YouTube is being used and consumer behavior is being changed, says Hannah. And I think Charles is right. Basically, it is affecting all of us. And Martin's very specific. If in many industries, digital makes it possible for new people to come in. They can offer the same service cheaper or a different service, and that drives down the cost point. That can be very dramatic. So Martin says it changes how we interact with customers and their expectations as well. Is this the sort of thing that you were expecting, Nuri?
That is the kind of thing I was expecting. So you're obviously a very erudite group of people here.
They are.
But so what I'm actually going to try and cover today is, given that we're living in this world of disruption, how can you be agile enough to deal with that and come up with a learning strategy? And then how can workplace performance be accelerated with new technologies? I'm really going to be focusing on the first. So how do you actually construct a strategy in this kind of um, increasingly shifting world? And how can you keep pace with the digital disruption that's going on in the business? And then I'll focus a little bit on what kind of technologies I think are going to be important in the future, or in fact now. So the first thing, as we all know, is that the pace of agile new tech disruptors is actually fueling that fourth revolution, and it is a state of confusion. Some of you have talked about in the side chat there in terms of there's a lot of appetite, but we don't really know how to deal with it. And that is actually because of that pace and the fact that new people are coming in, but they're driven by us as consumers for the first time. It's not big companies selling their brand onto us. It's actually us that are making or breaking companies. So just look at this particular statistic, for example. You know, the time it used to take to reach a valuation of 1 billion or more was 20 years. And even for Google, that took 8 years. And look at Uber, 4 years. But now, Xiaomi, it's only taken 2 years. Who's heard of Xiaomi, by the way? Put your answers in the chat if you have. Nope. Nope, no, not me. Well, the surprising thing is they started out in 2011. They're a Chinese electronics company. They make smartphones, apps, laptops, you know, the Internet of Things devices. And they're already the fourth largest smartphone manufacturer. And it's only taken them 2 years to reach that valuation of a billion. But in just a few more years, they've actually grown to 46 billion. So what's driving that is the consumer market. It's us, it's you and me. And the other thing is that the cost of advanced technology is plummeting. So it's now affordable to have quite complicated technology. So if you look in particular at things that, like industrial robots, used to cost $500,000 for one. Now it costs less than someone's salary to have a pretty robust industrial robot. Think of the Amazon fulfillment centers, you know, all the logistics centers. It's not actually costing them that much to have quite sophisticated industrial robots. Similarly, with the cost of solar energy going down from $30 per kilowatts down to 16 cents now, and dropping if you get down to 2018 numbers. And who remembers the Genome Project, when, you know, it used to cost 2.7 billion back in 2000 to find 1% of DNA gene strand. Now, you know, you can actually personally go online and find out your own DNA. So the cost of serious technology is actually falling. And the third thing is that digital distribution costs nothing. So there's even more fuel to go at a pace and you know, adopt things even quicker. So with all of these things going on, how do you think that our great bastion of business leaders are responding to this? So this is taken from Deloitte's 2018 readiness report, where they asked 1,600 C-level executives these questions, and I've only taken 4 of them. But in relation to number 1, how many of those leaders, and they were all over the world, so this is representative, if you like, of the global view. How many of those C-level executives do you think they are doing all they can to build the right workforce? Any percentages anyone wants to put into the chat? 25%. 20, yeah. 15, 10. Well, you'll be surprised to know that actually 86% of them, yeah, Dave's on the money there. About 86% of them think that they're doing all they can to build the right workforce. And
I think
how many
the
of
appropriate there, maybe they think they're doing all they can.
That's right. That's right. They personally think they're doing all they can to build the right workforce. So Charles is saying, yes, they're possibly delusional. Well, let's have a look at, well, how many of them regard talent and HR issues as a high priority? Would you like to guess? 100%? 30? 95, 20. Okay. Well, yeah, 20, which is what some people thought. Only 1 in 5 think that talent and HR is actually a priority. This is going to produce quite a confused landscape. But the third statistic, how are they, how confident are they in their ability to harness the changes associated with digital disruption? How many do you think were confident about their own ability? 60%, 20, 98. Oh, Charles, 30%. Woohoo! 70.
There's a really wide range of numbers. I like Jerry's 98%. That's very precise. I'm looking forward to answering this one.
So I'm going to give you the answer to 3 and 4. So there's only 14% that are highly confident in their own abilities, and I think this is given, this is why executive coaching is actually on the rise at the moment, because there is some real nervousness in their own leadership skills, in their own ability to be able to execute on what's needing to be done. And obviously there's only 25% on the other hand, so 86% think that they're doing all they can to build the right workforce, but then only 25% think that they've got the workforce with the necessary skills for the future. So what it's really showing is that business is frankly quite confused about how to respond. And the truth of it is that they're looking to you guys, HR and L&D, to upskill people when there isn't necessarily a business direction that might be in place. Now that presents quite a challenge for HR and L&D. And so the natural question then to ask you is, so how is all of this affecting your business? Or rather your particular department, so it could be HR as well as L&D, but what is this confusion which seems to be in most businesses? How is that affecting you?
I'm going to come back to that question that Hannah brought up. Does this mean they feel they can't do what is needed? If we have time at the end, we'll have a look at that, Hannah. But in the meantime, let's ask ourselves this question. What's digital disruption doing to L&D? I love it in this when it says multiple attendees are typing and then you wait and everything comes through at once. So Jerry's talking about lots of focus groups organised and intranet set up. But is that what you're doing, Jerry? And do you think it's effective? I'm not saying it's not. I'd just like to know. It's a very scattered landscape, Jerry says. Look, Angela's got an interesting point. We've automated a lot of our learning rather than workshops and conferences. When you say automated the learning, presumably mean automated the delivery of learning content, Angela. What sort of things have you done? I'd love to know more about that. And now look, Derek's interesting, Nuri. Everyone
Mm,
wants training on digital themes, but they're not clear about the requirements or indeed how they'll use the training. That's
yeah,
really reflecting what you were talking about just now, that people know
yeah,
digital is important, they just don't know what to do with it.
yeah, exactly.
Martin's
Um,
positive though. He's talking about how you could do more with less money
mhm,
in this
mhm.
field,
Yeah, absolutely. Seminars being
and I
abandoned due
like
to
Catherine's.
IT issues. Yes.
Yes.
That's very true.
James has got a good point here. Enabling peer-to-peer learning. So the disruption is enabling us to do things. I guess the question is, are we harnessing it? So, of course, people have always learned peer-to-peer. James isn't, I don't think, saying they haven't done, but they enable us to do that at scale and indeed asynchronously. So you can have a question in London which is answered for you 2 hours later by somebody in Boston.
Mm,
Um,
absolutely.
oh, that's fascinating. This, okay, and I'm going to shut up for a minute. But Nuri, what's your reaction to all these things we're saying?
Well, I think the point is that there is a little bit of stasis. I mean, even more so than, the current back and forth that we're having in relation to the Brexit deal. I mean, it is, I think, a lot of leaders are obviously rabbit in headlights mode, and that's then being pushed down to L&D to try and sort out. That's the kind of impression I get from a lot of the conversations that I've been having recently. And L&D is sort of thinking, well, how do I even approach this? Because I'm not really getting a clear business requirement. And so, really, what I'm going to be talking about is the fact that there is something that we can do to actually make sure that we get back into the boardroom and actually set some direction on this. And so, what I'm going to go through is how that might be approached. Obviously, it's not the only approach, but it might be one element. So, um, it's clear though that radical change is needed. And I'm not sure how many of you have been looking at some of the reports that are coming out at the moment, but the Oxford Martin and Citigroup report kind of really spelt it out for me. And I've taken two statistics from that particular report. And that is that within the next 5 years, 57% of all jobs are going to go. And there's another statistic which those of you that have children might be interested in, and that is that 65% of the jobs that exist now will no longer exist when our children come out of school. And I've got twin girls who are going to be turning 8. So that is really scaring me too, James. And this is quite a telling statistic as well, in that the half-life of a skill, so you go to university, you do all your degrees, you do your masters, well, that degree is only really going to potentially help you for the next 6 years. So, there has got to be a fundamental shift in relation to our whole education system, but I'm going to focus really on work at the moment and the workplace. So definitely a radical shift is needed. And this is the thing that we're all going to have to, or our companies are all going to have to become. Every company is going to be a software company of some sort. And this is also echoed by the World Economic Forum, almost verbatim, which says that in the future, every company will be a technology company. So in that framework, what I think is needed, because everything, all the responsibility is actually being pushed down to HR and L&D. For me, step one, and I know this looks a little bit complicated, but really to break it down into its really basic components, step one is really knowing about where the business is and making them accountable for the people issues in the business. So it's not an HR and L&D issue, it's actually a business issue. And L&D can only really be an advisor to the business, a facilitator to challenge, execute and facilitate. But really the business has to take some ownership in at least identifying the needs and following through then on the initiatives that you jointly create. And equally, more and more importantly, is measuring the results from those initiatives. But in order to do that, I think have to understand, where is the business? Now, all businesses, according to McKinsey, and I have to say, in practice, when I was in practice, but even before they codified this S curve, or you see businesses follow this kind of pattern where they're stable, then suddenly there is a growth spurt, they reach the peak, and then things start tailing off. And that's where it's a substantial business where it's established for some time, and obviously the digital disruptors are doing something slightly different. So the first thing that I would suggest that you do is actually go and have a look at this particular guide, because all businesses do follow this pattern, whether you're an incumbent or a disruptor. And what it actually highlights is, what kind of barriers are you going to get from the business potentially when you go to them, asking them deep questions. So it will tell you, for example, that when things are going well, there's quite a lot of myopia. It's almost like, we're doing well, what are you talking about? We don't necessarily need to invest in this element. We need to invest in the business, not our people. And then when things are starting to go wrong, no one wants to hear from you, because everyone wants to avoid pain, essentially. Everyone wants to keep stable, whereas actually that's the wrong thing to do. And the as you can see, the disruptors take advantage of that myopia and that avoidance of pain to really grow in that period. And also, there's that state where things aren't going well. There is a huge element of inertia. And so what I would say to you is, you are constantly being told to engage with the business. And what I would do is take this graph and take it to each of your departments and ask them to map out where they are on that digital curve, on that digital disruption curve. And how are they going to actually make their plan? How are they going to make their targets in the next 6, 12, 18, and 24 months? And start the conversation then about, well, what are the actual needs that they have? How are they going to ensure that their people behave in the way that's needed to achieve business plan? And what do they then need from you in terms of support and facilitation? And then I would actually...
How... Sorry to interrupt you. We're on voice over IP, so there's a slight lag. I'm sorry, I'll cut in. I'll keep talking, then I'll stop. How aware do you think most departments are of two things? Firstly, who the likely disruptors are in their field, and secondly, what they should be doing to deal with it. Because in my experience, most people are so focused on the operational, they don't have the big picture view, and they certainly don't think about learning. They do think about training. So perhaps I'm being too negative, but do you think they're up for it?
I think I think it's a really good question, but I think that most people know who their competitors are. They all know that they're doing better than them, or who's doing better than them. A lot of them have that kind of insider information. What they don't necessarily know how to do is override that. What new strategies can they employ in order to raise their revenues again, in order to come up with new product, whatever it might be. So there is a certain myopia, if you like, around that, or even inertia around that. But I think that once you start that conversation, I think you, as L&D and HR, are actually coaches to the business in yourselves. And you can actually get them thinking about those conversations. A lot of people at the moment have got, the big four or consulting firms in trying to help with that digital disruption. So there is a roadmap in most cases. They just don't know how to translate that into their people strategy. And I think by having that conversation, you're actually going to be helping the business to find that roadmap and doing it together. And that's why I
And
think
at the
that this
very
is a
least, you'll be positioning the learning and development department as a business partner rather
absolutely,
than as a training fulfillment house. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that this, I was going to say that I would then take a sample group of representative learners in that department or part of the business and ask them exactly the same questions. Now, that might lead to a completely divergent set of responses. But what it does is, I think it fulfills three key elements of this strategy framework that I'm going to talk about. And the first is that it situates the business. It tells you where they are on that growth curve so that you can plan for that disruption. You know whether it's on the rise or actually it's on the plateau, and actually you can help then get that acceleration. And what are you going to do together to get that acceleration? And the second thing I think it does is that it transfers that accountability for people issues to the business, so that it becomes part of their problem and they understand that you as an expert can facilitate the solution, but they have to articulate it and they have to own the problem. And that also helps with budget issues, which I'm sure everyone has to battle for, because it suddenly starts becoming a key focus. They start understanding that they can't achieve their plan, they can't achieve their target unless they have the right skills in place and the right support in place. And that is not going to be a fantastic all singing, all dancing system. It is going to be learner engagement, it's going to be people engagement, it's going to be building people's skills. And the third thing I think is that it gives you access to the learners themselves and what it is that they require. And it might not be a massive difference, it might really be small tweaks that make a huge difference in terms of the delivery model that you already have. But it's certainly worth asking that question and getting them engaged early on as well. So I think, as I said, in terms of that sort of overall umbrella framework, you start with that business performance, as we've talked about, and that allows you to plan for the disruption that might be coming. But then you've got to look at, well, how do you make learning continuous? How do you make it personalized and at the point of need? And when I talk about point of need, I mean in the actual workflow. So make learning continuous. And what I mean about that is that a lot of organizations seem to have really good induction plans, and then they have really good senior and executive coaching or senior plans. But in the middle, for the largest group of people, the masses, there doesn't really seem to be a continuous learning path for them, or a view on constantly updating their skills. And I think that obviously that needs to change so that there are programs that are personalized and continuous for that large mass of people. There's quite a bit of confusion as well about what point of need tools mean, or rather maybe there's a more varied definition. So I don't mean resources. What I mean is something like what we call Saffron Ease, and that's a tool that sits on the background, in the background of anyone's laptop or machine, but recognizes exactly where you are in a field or in a system or any other desktop or web app, and can provide you with help on how to get through that system or field or process. So it knows it's context sensitive, it can be completely personalized to the individual's level of confidence with the system or the process, it can be translated, can be authored, individuals can rate the help that they get, all of that. And obviously you get an amazing amount of data and reporting out of it because you know exactly where people are getting stuck. And then if it's a systems issue, it's an easy one to actually fix the next time the system is causing that, if it's causing an issue for everyone. But it's basically in the workflow. It's at their fingertips. They don't need to get out of where they are to go and get it. And things like these tools are going to be essential in this age of disruption to be able to essentially get on and give headspace so that someone doesn't have to actually learn everything. They've got something that can actually help them do the day-to-day tasks in their normal role, and then have time for the next point, which is building essential skills. And that's where I think that the future is obviously going to have to focus on. At the moment, we don't have AI that is empathetic. We don't have AI that is as creative as humans can be, or is as innovative. It's not that far away, but at the moment, that is what humans can do. So building on those essential critical analysis skills is where I think the focus should be. And finally, mine data. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about mining data, because it's something that is going to be absolutely key for the strategy in being able to show the business back what the results of the strategy are, and getting more and more buy-in, but also refining your strategy and so that you're able to make it even more effective and quicker and more agile in terms of your reinvention of it, which you will have to do on a continuous basis. I'm going to pause there and see if there are any specific questions.
A bunch of things have come up, Nuri, which I'll talk about. Jerry was been talking about, and Hannah was saying the same thing, and Martin, but people find it very difficult to work out. They know things are changing, but they find it difficult to take your second point there, actually plan for the disruption and deal with it. So how would you go about assisting people in that initial, very important business of working out, well, what is it that's changing? And then you can go on to look at what you need to do.
So I would be saying to the business, what is it that needs to, what do you need to actually achieve as a business? And then work backwards from that. So how do you, if it's about increasing revenue, well, what's actually stopping that increase in revenue? Is it a product business that you have? Is it a service business you have? What are the barriers to that? And they will know what those barriers are. And then you will be able to provide the right solutions for them if it's if it's a training intervention. If it's an HR intervention, then obviously you'll pull in those appropriate resources. But it's actually getting to the nub of the problem in the first place, and that's all about, I think, having the conversation.
I have to say, it sounds terribly vague, but of course you're absolutely right. You have to have the conversation and do research as well. But this is why you alluded to it earlier, Nuri. People will spend money on a system hoping to solve something, but what they really need to do is talk to people, and that's in a way much more complicated. Both Frank and I in the chat are both asking Charles to go into a bit more detail about performance support. I think that's very interesting to dwell on that.
Yeah. Well,
here's a question from, go on, Nuri.
I think the performance support tools are the point of need, and the workflow tools, personally, in the same way that we've been using a calculator or Excel spreadsheets to help us calculate formulas, etc. Those are actual PS tools, and these point of need tools, workflow tools, chatbots, etc. And I'm actually just going to go on to what might actually help in terms of that disruption. So I hope the next slide might help put a few of the meat on the bones, if you like. So these
Let's go on to that, and I think Charles is going to continue the background with talking about performance support. I wasn't saying that you were having a go at performance support, Charles. I was just really trying to understand the nature of what you were saying. You carry on, Nuri, and we'll carry on having this conversation about performance support as well. And I know it will all come together beautifully on your next slide as well. So you carry on.
Okay. Um, so that's the broad framework, the principles of the framework. But getting into the nitty-gritty, I'd actually look at where is the point of need. So this is based on Mosher and Gottfriedsen's 5 moments of need, and what I've transplanted on top, if you like, is what might be useful in terms of either performance support tools or some of the more traditional learning that we've been used to. But really, if you think about learning needs, we're all learning either for the first time something new. We might then need something, to learn something a little bit more deeper. And then we've got to find a way of applying that into the workplace, or thinking about how you might approach a particular issue or a problem. And you might need some coaching or some learning around that. And then lastly, when things change and, things, it's not about learning something new, it's about actually dealing with that change. How can you then provide support, because you are going to need to learn? And so I think it's actually a good way of looking at each part of your business and thinking, well, what is the need for people that are coming at this the first time? What about those people that need to know more? And I think that a lot of our initiatives potentially only stop at 1 and 2, and I'm not sure how many of us actually think about 3, 4, and 5. I'd be interested to hear from the group about whether they, or the business asks for application in the workplace, problem solving, and how to deal with change.
Sorry, I'm just laughing at Dave's point here about the 6th moment of need when it's too late. I think, to be fair to Bob and Conrad, they've probably covered that, Dave, on the 4th one when things go wrong. But I do take the point. Yeah, Charles is mentioning the Friesland Campina things that they've been doing. Wherever I go, Friesland Campina seem to keep cropping up. They seem to be extraordinarily effective. They produce their own mobile app for on-the-job support. And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, Charles, they are a dairy farming cooperative. So it's the least digitally disruptive environment that you could think of, but it's a great case study. I'll go and search out the URL for that in a minute. Nuri, Neve Williams says, what about the point of need for soft skills? This was on the previous slide. If you're in the middle of dealing with it, yeah. So can you share any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. So I think that there's a lot of talk at the moment about chatbots, and I think you're probably all going to go, oh, groan. And there are in my mind, there are 2 different types of chatbots. In particular. So soft skills training, I think, blended learning, I think role play, but I think there are digital solutions to that as well. And the type of chatbot that I'm referring to is not sort of the Q&A chatbot, the one that, you ask a question and it goes and finds an answer for you, but the kind that is actually more a virtual mentor. And that's the one that we've been developing at the moment, which is essentially something that helps you with that problem solving. So it's basically a mentor that can talk you through a conversation that you're just about to have, like a difficult conversation. It can help you practice. It learns that you've had a difficult conversation. It then comes back to you and asks you how it went. It asks you questions to make you essentially think about what went well, what you do again, and what you wouldn't necessarily do again. So it's really around that application and essentially problem solving, or helping you self-reflect at a time when it's quite hard to find often the time to do that. So I think it can actually help with soft skills as well in terms of practice and role play, or at least putting into practice what you've actually learnt from a face-to-face intervention or from a blended learning intervention, and putting that constantly in your mind through push notifications to help you practice and to try and embed that in your day-to-day role. So I think there is a place within digital for that to happen.
So I was just giving us a summary of that Friesle Campina. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's a Dutch phrase, but case study, which is really interesting. And it's very common, as Charles says, that people come in saying, we've got a knowledge and skills problem, and that turns out to be a small part of the chatbot you're talking about, Nuri. I do my annual survey, and at the end of last year, we saw that the survey, well, my prediction was that chatbots would be big this year, but would also suffer a incident in 2018, which indeed you just talked about. We know there have been successful bots with things like Wobot from Stanford that helps people deal with depression. And also, I was at an event in the Netherlands where I was talking to a confessional bot, and this bot asks you questions which prompt you to reflect about things. You know you're talking to a bot,
Exactly.
but it still really helps you think about things. And of course, Dr. Julia Shaw, who is a keynote speaker at Learning Technologies in the past, has a bot which she's using to help people deal with a very personal subject of sexual harassment at work. So it is absolutely the case, isn't it, Nuri, that you can use bots to help people think about things. And sometimes, Julia Shaw says, people will actually be happier to deal with them precisely because it's a machine and not a person.
Absolutely, and we've seen this really work effectively in terms of extending that face-to-face learning, so that because once role play is done, it's done. You don't get the chance to practice again, and that's what's needed: deliberate practice. And you can actually program the bot. It obviously takes a bit of sophistication, but yeah, SAFbot, if anyone's interested in having a demo, works in exactly that way. It allows for reflection, it allows for practice, and it really extends the money that you spend in terms of face-to-face. It really extends that in terms of the soft skills. And yes, people do like to use it because there's no embarrassment factor. In terms of trying something different or trying something new.
I had somebody come to me this morning, Nuri, saying, Don, people internally in my organisation keep asking me to do things which I know aren't right in learning because either they like it or the people in their team like it, and I know it's not going to be effective. How has SAFbot been received? Are people enthusiastic about it, or do they see it as not being as good as, I don't know, a classroom course or the role plays you're talking about?
I think it's a mixed response. Some people are very you always get those people that jump up at the first role play and want to be the difficult person and want to be the actor in the room, and those people are obviously usually they probably don't always need the training, or maybe they do in terms of calming down a little bit. I don't, I think a lot of it is around the fact that we tend to forget a lot of the face-to-face, and we're all at the moment accustomed to getting push notifications. Our world is changing in the way that we do things. Our lives are changing in the way that we do things. They are becoming more digital. We're more likely to be speaking to our phones than anything else. So I think from my perspective, it's been received really well. People find it easy to use, easy to talk to, because it's not necessarily a live person. They don't have that mentor in the organization, so they're using something that will provide them that mentorship. So it's on the whole been very well received, even by people who the organisation thought wouldn't receive it well. So people that are, or they thought were not so tech savvy, wouldn't necessarily use their smartphone or whatever for that. we've actually had a great response. And I haven't sort of heard anyone say, I want to replace this with, I want to replace the face-to-face entirely with this. I think face-to-face still has a place. I think, e-learning still has a place. This is just another way of extending that learning.
James has raised a really good question about, do we all consider this experience today as digital? I don't know, James. I think increasingly the lines between what we used to call RL, real life, and I don't know, the digital life, it has blurred to the extent that we consider it all to be just life. And even the idea that it might be digital might be true if you step back, but generally I think we just look at it as being part of how we live our lives. Nuri, in terms of your work with both Saffronese and also SAFBot, I love the word SAFBot, by the way, with those in organizations, how are people reacting? Do they think it's digital? They're not replacing things, or do they think it's just a useful additional tool?
I think they think of it as a useful digital tool. I mean, with ease, it takes the headache of trying to find something and spending 2 hours trying to find something on the internet, or logging out of where you are to go and find something on a course or a resource or a help desk or whatever. It just takes away that frustration and from a company perspective, they're getting data all the time about what kind of help is needed. And it's really increasing productivity levels within organizations. And productivity levels, as you know, are at an all-time low in the UK. And in sort of initial deployments, there's like over a 70% increase in productivity, because people can just get on with doing sort of the mundane things that they have to do and not get distracted. So you've got to remember that every time anyone comes out of something and goes on Google potentially to look it up because they can't find it on their own intranet, they waste 26 minutes before they go back again. You multiply that up by the number of times in a day that someone might do that, times that across a whole organization, it's phenomenal. So these performance support tools, whatever you might want to use, they're just like how we use a calculator now. We don't know how to do mental arithmetic anymore. Who knows the sine of so and so, the cos of X, Y, and Z. We don't do that. Human productivity improved a great deal just by having that sine function on our calculators. And that's, I think, how these workplace performance tools will become. It's just an aid. We take for granted spell check, but it's actually quite an important little tool. And I think that things like SAFBot, things like ease will actually become the norm. They just need to get adopted. And all of that leaves so much more time, for that individual to actually be creative, to be innovative, to think about new product lines, to think about new service revenue streams. So I think that, I think there's a great potential in that.
To do the stuff, in fact, that only human beings can do. Gary agrees with you, talking about the value of coaching and having tools to help you be more productive there. Frank would like to ask, could you elaborate on where this is going to happen? Elaborate on which physical environments face-to-face learning will grow. And I'm not quite sure what it's in reference to. I guess you must have said something about that. Do you have any thoughts about Frank's question?
Not quite sure what you mean. Do you mean about experiential learning?
Frank, could you come back and provide
happens on
Frank,
mountains?
I'm not sure if you're referring to something that Nuri said. Could you? Yeah. Sorry, Nuri. I was just going to say to Frank, okay. could you elucidate a bit more about what you mean there? Because I got a bit lost there, Frank. I'm not sure where the question was coming from. So Nuri, by the way, I can do mental maths, and I do try to. I would never know the sine or cosine or anything, but I hope basic mental arithmetic. I still think is important. I'll tell you why. So I think it's important to have a feel for numbers. I think if someone says, look, we 500 people came through the door, and we're going to get half of those to pay for us. That's 300 people. You have to know that half of 500 is not 300. Now, it's important always to have a sense of whether a tool is helping you and giving you the right answers. Is there a concern that if we give ourselves too much up to tools, then garbage in, garbage out, we could be dealing with something that isn't as good as it could be?
I think there's, all of the sort of performance support tools, especially those that are backed or have an element of AI in the back end. You have to make, there has to be checks and balances. You're absolutely right, Don. There has to be checks and balances. Everyone will know about Microsoft's bot, which, enough people gave sufficiently controversial answers, and it taught itself to become a racist bot. So, that's the last thing that anyone obviously wants. So I think you're absolutely right that there needs to be some checks and balances. So an overall understanding, I think, a sense check is absolutely necessary. But I suppose my daughter asked me the other day, when I was saying to her, your writing needs to be a lot neater, and she said, "What's the point?" I was like, "What do you mean? What's the point? You've got to be able to write." And she said, "I don't see you write. I see you talk." And she's right. Voice is going to take over writing. So there are going to be, yes, she needs to know her letters, but does she really need to be able to write? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that she will do in the future.
There is a lot of talk that we're going to drop cursive script, joined up writing in schools, and go for people printing. Something I think would be a shame. I tell you what, if you only do it once, it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile doing it. Coming back to Frank's question, he was saying, are we losing the human connection, appropriate use of body language, and so on when we're in a physical space? And growing on that, sort of adding to Frank's question, do you think it will be useful? Do you think physical face-to-face training, Nuri? In which areas do you think face-to-face training will continue to show its value and continue to be used? Where are the last bastions of that going to continue against digital change?
Well, I think there's not any certain areas. So back in 2016, we produced a flipped classroom intervention for one of the for one of the big four, and that was flipped because the technology itself could continuously assess. At the background, obviously, through that assessment being able to be seen, this was a very complex business simulation that was created. It was a blended learning approach, but a flipped classroom approach, and the face-to-face was actually very appropriate to that cohort. It could be seen exactly where that cohort was struggling, and so the face-to-face intervention was very, very targeted to 10 or 12 people in that cohort. So I think that it's not necessarily subject matter that face-to-face is important in. It's more about what value, what value can that face-to-face give? And there's obviously a lot of value in face-to-face. People get a lot of value out of interaction with another human. There's no doubt about that. But it's actually using it to its best effect. And I'm not an advocate of getting rid of face-to-face at all and going 100% digital. I'm not an advocate of that. What I am an advocate of is using smart tools to help people in terms of their performance, but supplementing that with the right resource, with the right interventions that's going to add value to not only the business but also the individual. Does that answer your question?
That's a really good point. We tend to add, well, it does to me anyway. I can tell us whether it adds or not. He says, do you see value in face-to-face? And what do you mean by the word value? That's a fair question from Frank. Why did they value
to experience providing
Well, I
that
think
learning
first of
to
all,
them
because it
just
was
in
targeted, it was very personalised to them. It was very, you know, it's they could answer any questions after having done the digital learning. They could assess They could assess themselves. They could see what their perceptions were. This was a project management simulation, just to add a little bit of colour to this. And there's a perception of how they did. There's a perception of how they scored,
I have a question for both of you.
or how they were assessed. And it was very directed conversations on how to bridge that gap. So that's the value, I think, of that particular intervention. And the value then is the individual understands exactly what they've got to do in order to improve their performance, and not just what their self-perception is, but what the outer world perception, if you like, is. Oh, thanks for...
Thank you. That was really... Yeah, that was really good. Thank you. Nuri, we're close to... I hadn't... just looked at the clock. We're close to wrapping up time. So if you could push through the rest of your slides, then
okay.
I'll do the final.
I'll go very quickly. First of all, when I talked about mining data, and I know that everyone thinks that they just don't have it, but everyone does have it. We're working with a data scientist team at the moment in conjunction with an apparel retailer. And that was the first thing that our client said as well, is that no, we don't have the data, and they literally laughed and fell off their chairs, because what's been proven is that there is data. Every organization has lots of it. It's about getting it from different sources, and yes, there are some internal battles around who owns that data, confidentiality around it, all of those things. Yes, we know that, but you can find real insights, and if you combine that with business performance, you can really get some not only current status data, but also predictive data. And that's what we're working on at the moment, is looking at data from things like appraisal forms, sourcing data from LMS, from assessments such as DISC and Myers-Briggs, and then from business KPI measurements, from HR databases, high performance measures, and drawing all of that together in terms of giving predictive data on what kinds of people and attributes in particular will be successful now, but will also take them into the future, and who will be the next generation of leaders. It's obviously only indicative. It's not that this person will achieve, or this person is going to be the next CEO. It's just predictive. And I suppose the final things that it is a race at the moment. But it's an iterative cycle of continuous improvement. So get yourself ready for the marathon, but you've got to start now, otherwise I'm afraid you will get left behind. But to help you, we've got a digital disruption survival kit. It's just a small giveaway that you can download, and it gives you about 5 tactics to hit your learning strategy goals. And it also offers a one-to-one with one of our consultants if you're going through a particular issue that you just want some help with. So thank you everyone for listening. Yeah, I think it is. But thank you everyone for listening. I do appreciate your participation as well.
That's great. We've got more problems with sound. You're cutting out a bit, Nuri, so I'm just going to jump in.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to have to jump in and wrap up now because we're past 1 o'clock. People are saying thank you. I'd like to say thank you very much, Nuri. Great job. Lots to think about there. And I love the idea of the digital disruption survival kit. I imagine it coming, I don't know, in a tin with intake strapped